are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Friday FARcast. I'm your host today, Robert Phoenix, and every now and then we go back to kind of an older format where I have a guest on the show and we explore a topic that is of interest to me, and I believe it's going to be an interest to you as well, because most of the people who listen to my show share similar interests. And even if you're a first-time listener and you've been drawn here by the title of the show and what we're talking about, I think you're going to find today's show not only fascinating from an ecological standpoint, but also from a personal and spiritual standpoint. In about 7 or 8 minutes, I'm going to be bringing on my guest. Her name is Madelaine Fernandez, and I've always had this kind of ability to uncover interesting people, and people that are ahead of their time in a lot of ways, and have a story to share that is incredibly unique. And Madelaine, like many other folks, have come into my life through the reading space. For her, she came in through my radio show on a Sunday night a couple of weeks ago. There's another gentleman named Perry Eulander who's going to be on my show in a few weeks, and Perry came to me because he saw me on Gaia TV, now Gaia TV, and Perry he wrote a book, essentially. Perry wrote a book about his time in the Vietnam War and how it became, for all intents and purposes, a shamanic experience. It's a very different take on the Vietnam experience for the American soldier. Anyway, I was really impressed with Perry and his story, and I thought it needed a bigger audience. So I got in touch with my friend, Richard Grossinger, whom some of you might remember from being on my show a couple of times. Richard's a prolific author. He's also still involved in North Atlantic Books, which is his publishing company. It's a collective. It is a nonprofit. And so I connected Richard with Perry, and Richard loved his book. And they worked on getting Richard's book at that time, which was not even a published book, but a fully fleshed out book, and it edits and all kinds of stuff. Well, in June, Perry's book is going to hit the shelves. And it's going to be all about, again, his time in Vietnam and how it became a shamanic and almost mystical experience, and led him to a new path when he came home from Vietnam. So I'm going to have Perry on my show in a few weeks, and we're going to have a really fleshed out kind of 2-hour dive into his book and his world. And I met Perry through my website. He was a client, and now he's got a book. I hope that something similar will happen with Madelaine, because the story that she's going to share with you is going to blow your mind. And her passion is about the coral reefs and what's happening with the coral reefs and the destruction of the coral reefs, which is a very big deal. It's huge. The coral reefs are the rainforests of the ocean. 25% of the ocean's fish have a relationship with coral reefs. And the coral reefs are dying at an alarming rate. And Madelaine had, for all intents and purposes, a spiritual vision about her relationship with the coral reefs. And her story is astonishing. So when she gets on in a few minutes, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about her history, her life story. We're going to talk about the coral reefs. She's an expert on what's happening with the devastation of the coral reefs. And we're going to talk about a product that she has developed to essentially save the coral reefs and has a patent on. It is very difficult to get a patent. And not only are you dealing with the patent office and the rigorous application process, but you're also dealing with people who would love to steal your ideas, love to steal the patents. And we're going to talk about what that process is like for her as well. So, last Sunday, I apologize for last Sunday's show because I was trying to do it live, and the environment was a little uncontrollable. The microphone was maybe too omnidirectional. But I was talking about the maker culture. And the maker culture is the wave of the future. And it allows people to be involved in the industrialization and commercial process in a very personal kind of way. We lament over the fact that there's nothing being made in the United States anymore. That everything is going away, that, the manufacturing of clothing is moved to places like the Maldives or Bangladesh, or someplace in Central America like Guatemala or Costa Rica. It's become too expensive for even China to make clothes now. Vietnam, they're sourcing out into the deep fringes and the outlying regions of the third world to create products. So there's a lamentation over the fact that we're not creating anything. Well, the maker culture brings that right back home, and it puts the power into the hands of the individual. Now, it is a lot of responsibility. It's a lot of responsibility to take the power of creation back and put it into your own hands and to do something about it. Again, I'm in contact with Henry Macau. I read his site frequently. One of the things that I sent to Henry one time is, Henry, you're talking about this ongoing abduction of our world by the satanic Frankists, the Zionists, the Pharisees, the Freemasons, the New Babylonians. And he's got quite a bit of information to support this. But what Henry does not come up with is solutions. And, I've recently kind of circled back to Alex Jones. I don't agree with everything Alex says. I think Alex is into that Islamophobe camp. And I think it's kind of a distraction in some ways. But in other ways, I think, he's got some good information, really good information. So, but what is Alex offering up as a solution? We need solutions, folks. We need to be able to have an alternative system to get into place. We need to be able to have something. We got to lay new railroad track, and the maker culture, 3D printing, coming together in live space to learn how to do things together Because that's the beauty, right? You may not know how to do something. You may not know how to do a certain thing. Well, that's why there's other people in the world. Jupiter is in Virgo. This is a time to get schooled, to get some teaching, to have a connection with mentors, or peer-to-peer kinds of information and shared knowledge. Look, we have got to get off this wagon of pointing out the boogeyman. The boogeyman is there. We know the boogeyman is there. In fact, the boogeyman is showing up in record numbers. All these rituals that they've been doing, the Olympics, the Super Bowl, all the stuff that they've been taking place, and that's just one level of the ritual. There are other levels of the ritual that are going on simultaneously, maybe beneath those structures or adjacent to those structures, or at certain points and places in the world happening at the same time. Well, why? Well, because when that happens, we're opening portals. We're opening portals to interdimensional energies. And we are bringing, or people are, they're bringing these interdimensional energies and entities into our existence. Into our existence. That stuff's real. But we got to create something different. We've got to create a different model. We've got to lay the railroad track to a new experience. Okay. I just want to check on our guest. So I'm just going to send her an email because I don't want to wait too long. I want to get right into this. Okay. Here we go. I had to put that in there. Make sure she knows that we're doing this right now. So this is one of the reasons I'm having Madelaine on the show, because I want to start to build some momentum towards something new. Something new. This is a pivot. Just like businesses make pivots. They have an idea, and then at some point they pivot that idea. All the really successful businesses have a pivot moment. So I think we're on our pivot moment right now. We're on our pivot moment so that we can begin to turn the tide towards bringing everything back home. Instead of having, major factories all over the place, what about really small ones? Instead of having 100, let's say 50 major factories, what if we have 500 small ones where 4 or 5 people are getting together and working on little projects that impact our lives? Okay, let's turn the discussion up a few decibels, and let's open it up. Madelaine has just called in, and we're going to bring her on right now. This is Madelaine Fernandez, and when you hear her story, it's going to blow your mind, and hopefully we can help catalyze her dream and turn this into a reality, because not only would it be fantastic for her and her life work and her passion, but it would also be very helpful for the planet. Hey, Madelaine.
Hi there, Robert. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm hanging in there.
Well, thanks for being on the show and calling in. I really appreciate it, and we're happy to hear from you. And I'm psyched for you to share your story with the people that are listening. And again, I just laid this out before you called in, that you and I met about 2 weeks ago on my Sunday night show, and you wanted me to look at your chart. And then that discussion has led to kind of a ramping up of our relationship, and with me finding out more about your passion and your vision for saving the oceans of the earth. And I was just also sharing with people that this is not the first time where I've met somebody through sort of just normal means and had this opportunity to have a real moment of catalyzation. And I was sharing the story about Perry Ulander, who came into my life about a year ago. And Perry had a great great book that was unpublished about his experiences in the Vietnam War. And it was about how the Vietnam War became kind of a shamanic proving ground and kind of a mystical arena for him. And I just hooked him up with a publisher, and the publisher said, I love this. Well, long story short, Perry's book is coming out next month, and he's going to be on the show. So I'm hoping that we could have a similar catalytic effect in one another's lives. So why don't we start with you?
I do too.
Yeah. Why don't we start with you, and let's give some people some background and share your story. You know, who are you? Where did you come from? Talk about your family, which is a very important piece of your story. And I'm just going to hand the mic over to you, and you just talk, and you share as much as you want to share so that we can get up to date and up to speed around how this all leads into the coral reefs and your vision, okay?
Oh, thank you. And Robert, I'm really honored that you're letting me on your program here. It's coral reefs and the marine sciences have always fascinated me since the time I was a child. My family was in the restaurant business, and my father put up aquariums in our restaurants. And I was always fascinated with it, especially after him teaching me that corals were not pretty little plants, you know, very colorful parts of the ocean, but they're live creatures, animals, considered animals. And that it just fascinated me my whole life. And I think had I been able to attend college, there's two fields I would have studied. It was marine sciences, specifically corals, or else architecture. And it seems as though this vision experience I had is allowing me to do both. And several years ago, well, it was around 2000 actually, I had an experience. And as I've described it to you, it was truly the most incredible, amazing experience I've ever had in my life. And saw coral reefs that I could build, or that I actually was building.
Let's down for just 1 second. I hate to interrupt you,
Okay.
but I think one of the things that people may want to be interested in is that there is also kind of a construction and building sort of connection to your family. And when you were having this vision, this is what you shared with me, that it was in the workplace and that there was construction going on. And so I think that the construction piece was very interesting because it kind of feeds into your ability to not just have the vision, but be in a place where literally and figuratively it came to you. So I'd like to just ask you a little bit about the construction stuff.
Okay.
When did that come into play, and what was your role in that world?
Well, my brother has a manufacturing firm. It's FRP, which is Fiber Reinforced Polymers firm, and he does architectural reproductions, columns, balustrades, pediments, that type pieces. And truly, really very good work. And we're working on two huge projects at this time, and I was in charge of the balustrade production. And we're working on two different formulas for each one of the jobs. And it ended up one of the very vital elements in one of the formulas. There's only one place in the United States to get it, and it was coming from California to South Georgia, where we are.
All right, so let's get a time frame. Let's get a time frame around this. When is this happening? When is this happening?
It was in March of 2000 that this happened.
2000. And you are an active participant in this business and this is what you're doing. And tell people what a balustrade is if they're not familiar with that.
It's the structure, a railing structure.
Okay.
That goes up your stairs, around porches. In this particular case, the formula I needed was for the balustrade system that was adorning the roof line of the Moultrie County Courthouse in Moultrie, Georgia.
Okay.
And that formula, though the balusters were larger than the other project we were working on, they had to be of a lighter weight because they were on the roof line. And we were putting up hundreds along the roof line in this baluster system that we were creating. So they had to be very lightweight. And one of the products that I was using in that particular formula has minuscule glass spheres. And I'm talking minuscule, but they take up room, but of course lighter weight. So the particular, the quantity I needed to finish the particular project, we were having shipped to us. And the shipment, the truck was in an accident in Texas, and it was going to take a week to 10 days to get additional product to us.
Mm-hmm.
And I could not wait that long to continue making the balusters for this project.
Mm-hmm.
So I went back into the R&D development area and started pulling out other materials to try and come up with a comparable formula so I could keep making the balusters until the shipment arrived.
Right. Now, let me ask you a question.
Okay.
Did you have any background in chemistry or any, chemical engineering or anything like that?
No, not whatsoever. I honestly believe that the experience that eventually happened to me during this process was because I've had the fascination with corals. I'm no expert. I truly wish I had been able to continue my education in the marine sciences, but that didn't happen. But that doesn't mean that I've just been fascinated and studied them myself for many, many years.
So
a lifetime, actually.
So you're back there and you're working on compounds.
Yes.
You're rolling up your sleeves. You're putting this stuff together for the new balusters. Let's go from there.
Okay. So the first formula or recipe that I tried, it just didn't seem right. It wasn't going to be lightweight enough. So I went in and tried another formula. And when I took the baluster out of the mold, I stood there, and I'm a bit of a sensory type person. I have to feel it. I get a lot from scents and such like that. So I was standing there and holding the baluster in my hands, had my eyes closed, and had an incredible experience. A frequency hit my ears. It was just deafening. And I looked up to see what was happening in the shop, and there were about a dozen people or workers in front of me, including my brother, and I realized that all of a sudden they were all just standing perfectly still. I mean, it was like they were frozen.
So you're working with the compounds, and all of a sudden you hear a frequency and a sound.
Yes.
And then you look around, and everybody else is just frozen in time.
Correct.
Okay.
It was quite startling, actually, and I was starting to wonder, just what's going on now, and then from there, it felt like a huge hand had been put on top of my head and forcing my head down. And when I looked down, instead of a baluster in my hands, I was looking at a very large piece of coral. And I was really very startled about it. I'm thinking, what in the world is going on here? And then I look up again, and everyone is still frozen in time, and I'm trying to figure out. It was just my mind was literally exploding at this time with thoughts of what was happening. And then all of a sudden, these colors, like little bubbles, started appearing in front of me, and they became more intense and more defined until all of a sudden I was looking at a coral reef. It was as if I was actually underwater looking at a live reef. Mm-hmm. And it was just incredible. I really felt I was crying. My heart was coming out of my chest. My head was just buzzing, and all of a sudden it started to fade away. And a few seconds later, and in between all the time, I'm still looking. I can see the reef, but I could still see my brother and all of the workers behind it as if they were in, right in front of me, clear right in front of me. But everything they were still just frozen there. And all of a sudden here, these little colored bubbles started coming up again in front of my eyes, and then they morphed into another coral reef. And then it was fascinating, and it was as if I was truly under the water looking at a coral reef, but it was a different one. Mm-hmm. And then those colors faded away, and then another one came up. And the more that it happened, it was like the faster they started going, to the point where you could snap your fingers. It was almost instantaneous that there'd be another picture in front of me, another reef in front of me. Mm-hmm. And then it was gone. And then another one would pop up. And I knew each one of them was totally different, a whole different location and such. Until it got to the very end. I don't know how many. It could have been 200 of these that I saw. Wow. But in the same, it just kept going, just these pictures flashing in front of my eyes. And it was truly, I was blown away with it. Until it finally got to the last ones that came into my face had scuba divers in it. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, I was freaking out about this, but I'm looking at these divers taking these corals, they're like baskets of corals, mm-hmm. and placing them on top of this reef. And mm-hmm. I couldn't I just didn't know what was happening until I realized this one diver came into view, and it had a helmet on, mm-hmm. which I now know to be a snuba outfit. And I felt that it was a woman, and it was like I was getting closer to her, literally right to her, when she turned around, and it was me. I was looking at myself.
Oh, wow. So the snuba is, just to let people know, it's like a a helmet that fits around the entire head, right?
Yes, it's totally clear. You don't have to have use the respirators and all. It's the whole system. And it's like a spaceship, astronaut's outfit kind of thing. But it's just a whole totally clear helmet, that the outfit that you use.
Now had the snuba, now this is interesting, had the snuba been invented yet at that time?
Well, if it was only being used by, the military and governments.
So you were seeing a technological development ahead of its time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's important to point out here.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so then you see yourself, you're in the snuba. What happens next?
Yeah, well, I see there were other people in there, and one of them that I'm pretty sure I recognize, but I won't mention his name right now. But he's very prominent in the world right now. But anyways, it ended up, then it finally just started fading away. I was left standing there. I could see my brother and the workers, about a dozen of them. They were perhaps 15, 20 feet in front of me. But there were two huge work tables between us. And they just all of a sudden, the frequency, the noise that I'd been hearing stopped, and I was back into this reality. And my body felt like jello, as if I didn't have a single bone in my body. And I started falling, and thank God one of the workers at the end of the table, he had seen me, I guess, as I was coming out of this experience, and had been calling to me, but I wasn't registering that he was calling. So he started yelling to my brother to get his attention, and my brother turns and looks at me, and just about that time was when I started going down. And thank God for Jorge, that he saw something was happening and got around the end of the tables and made a dive for the floor. And just as he hit the floor, I landed across his back.
So Jorge broke your fall.
Yes, he did. I would have undoubtedly died hitting a 4-foot-thick concrete floor. It would have been all over for me.
Well,
and he saved my life.
It certainly would have put you in a really perilous situation with your head and your neck and your spine.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and at the very least would have made it much more difficult for you to continue on your path, whether you were 6 feet under or, in a some sort of a recovery unit for the next year, trying to put your body back together. So now
I wouldn't have survived. No, I would not have survived.
Well, I hope Jorge got a bonus that year.
Oh, yes, he did.
Yeah.
And he knew he was a super great guy anyways.
Yeah.
Yes, he was.
So then, after this, you are not the same. You're hospitalized, what, about 10 days? Isn't that right?
Well, no, they didn't keep me in the hospital. My family thought I'd had a stroke.
Okay.
I couldn't speak. I just couldn't talk. My eyes, they said they looked like saucers. I couldn't speak. I was just literally, not traumatized by this. The experience was just so amazing, and my body just seemed to be in this incredible high vibration. It took about 10 days before I was really finally able to start talking, more than saying, "Oh my God." That's about all I could say. I think I started that. That's because that's all I could say for about 10 days. But it truly was an experience that, and I can't believe I've just talked about that over news like this. I mean, you'd be surprised, Robert, how some of the people that I have told this to look at me like I'm absolutely, nuts. But it happened. I know it happened. There's no way anyone could tell me it didn't happen. And you hear stories of how other people, incidents, sometimes when maybe an accident, they're in the middle of an accident or something's about to happen where time seems to just stand still.
Right.
That was it. That would be it. But,
well, you and I talked about, and I mentioned this to you, people like Gordon Michael Scallion, or from the astrological world, Ra Uru Hu, the founder and creator of human design. Very similar experiences. A type of paralysis takes over them. They both have a vision. They're both unable to speak roughly for a period of 7 to 10 days afterwards, because they're trying to integrate everything back into this massive kind of, what I would call a interdimensional torque, that's taking you out of your space-time locality, and to such a degree that coming back into this frequency and spectrum, you literally have to find the signal again in order to come back in. Right?
Oh, it was difficult. Yes, it was very difficult. I didn't want to come back, honestly.
Well, so this is a common, uncommon experience, and it is in the sort of the bucket of having a mystical experience, but also a vision. And this gets us back into like Native American territory, shamanic territory, where somebody has a vision. It wasn't just like you were experiencing oneness and bliss and, samadhi, Godhead. No, there's something very specific that came to you out of this. And this is your relationship with the coral reefs. So let's talk about that. Let's transition into from vision to action. Where does this take you?
Okay. I think it's because of my fascination with corals. It ended up, I realized that different component that I had used in that second formula was a calcium carbonate, which is what corals secrete that makes the skeleton, the coral skeleton. That's a calcium carbonate. Well, that happened to be the element that I used in that second formula that I was trying to make. It was a calcium carbonate. And I truly believe that was the connection when, for me to realize I was in the business, working at my brother's business there, helping him out as I was. It's a manufacturing process that replicates. You have to make molds and such from it for the piece that you want to replicate.
Right.
Well, I realized that it's the calcium carbonate that I was using in this formula is what the corals secrete. That why couldn't I make a formula to replicate corals? Because in this vision, that's what was happening. That's what these people were doing under the water. Were taking what at the moment that happened I thought were live corals. And then I'm thinking, my God, I know how to I could manufacture artificial, which led to knowing the condition of the corals of the oceans in the world, and the devastation that's happening to them, ship groundings, pollution, human contact. There's so many reasons why the coral reefs are being literally devastated around the world when it's so unnecessary, but they are. And coral reefs are incredibly complex organisms that they're called the barometer of Earth's health, of our whole planet's health. They've such a very minute area, they say less than 1% of the sea or ocean, seabed, whatever you want to call it. Corals make up less than 1%. Some say that it's actually less than 1/4%. So there's lots of different takes on that, but still they carry 3/4 of the marine species in our oceans live. Their habitats are coral reefs. 27 to 28% of the consumables that are taken from our oceans come from coral reefs. And when coral reefs die, that's it. There's literally, some of the reefs that are out there are thousands of years old. Thousands. Most corals take a very long time to grow. There's just a few of the species that actually grow, a couple of inches a year. Most of them only grow a few centimeters a year. So it's really a very fragile system, but they are so necessary for the health of our planet, for the environment, for humanity, period. I wish that I could give you exact numbers, but so many of the numbers, calculations and such, the research that's done around the world differ.
Right.
So you can't, they differ a great deal.
So just to give people an understanding of what are some of the threats to the coral reefs, one of the big threats is ocean acidification.
Yes.
And it causes the coral reefs to calcify, literally die.
Yes.
And so, I'm not sure if it's a CO2 deal. Because one of the things that we have to be careful of, the World Wildlife Federation is very into coral reef protection, but they're also into driving this climate change meme and, wrapping everything around the carbon tax and all that stuff. And they'll take any bit of environmental data and twist it. Maybe really the reason why the oceans are acidified is because we're dumping shit into the oceans to cause it to be acidified. It has nothing to do with the rising rates of CO2. So, let's be clear that with things like coral reefs or the melting of the ice caps or the deforestation of the Amazon, they can be weaponized in some ways towards a political agenda. And what we're really trying to do is we're trying to kind of steer clear of that, I think, and just come up with a solution and not necessarily tag it to some overarching kind of planetary, kind of atmospheric change. But we know that they're dying. I think it's due to what's being pumped into the ocean, the waste, these ships out of the ocean will dump their bilges over and over again. They will dump oil. They'll dump petroleum if they have to, and all this becomes a toxic cocktail. Not to mention what happened with Fukushima. So let's just get into the solution. And your solution is you came up with a patent for this. You came up with a patent for your formula, And let's talk about what that was like and the process around that, because that in and of itself is a very rigorous and difficult process.
Oh, yes. Well, I decided the vision I had was obviously so apparent of what I needed to do myself. I had to follow it. I started working to develop a formula that I believed would be what I needed, what would be correct for replicating corals and coral reef. So I moved back to Tampa, Florida, and started the patent application process, and that was in the beginning of 2002 was the process finally started. And I finally got my patent in August of 2011. Initially, I was given word that I went into almost immediately the it was patent pending status.
Mm-hmm.
And then next thing I know, I get put on hold. And it's been a truly long process. I honestly was about to give up. I didn't think it was ever going to come through for me until finally I got word in 2011 that it was finally going to be receive a patent status. And I think I've told you, but in the middle of that, I've ended up coming to help take care of my sister who had been in a terrible accident.
Mm-hmm.
But the process was very long. I didn't stop. I got the application process started and continued. I tried to get in touch with numerous organizations involved with the coral reefs just to see about getting their testing. When I met up with Dr. Eric Mueller. He's a world-renowned coral biologist that I was trying to get my product tested that it would be environmentally safe and sound to be used in the oceans for creating, and we're trying to expand the reef, actually. This is not just the corals. There's so much into this, Robert. I'm hoping that this project, what needs to be done is for the coral farming or aquaculture facilities to be built with research facilities to go along with that also. That is so important to have the research facilities. There's so many different organizations right now, but they're trying to develop or help the corals with their biological status, that they can more readily handle effects of what's happening in the oceans right now in their home. You know, there's the pollution, the heat, all of that.
Right.
It's literally killing off the reefs and at a very accelerated rate. And my dream was to build reefs, actual artificial reefs that could be used. People can be using those as tourist attractions and such, because if the reef is there, even the artificial reef, they're used as nurseries for the marine life.
Right.
And they can use, the marine life use those, or the artificial reefs, and leave the live reefs that are being stressed out right now. They can be made into marine protected areas. Keep the people out of them. Keep, the boat groundings and the ship groundings, things like that. Leave the life reefs, take the stressors off of them.
Right.
And in the interim, aquaculture, coral farming, and research facilities be growing corals. And when the corals are at a stage where they can be transplanted, to take them to the artificial reef, take out the artificial coral and plug in a live coral and let it continue growing that way. If I can step up a minute here, when coral spawning happens, when the larvae are released into the waters, I'm going to simplify this. Their main objective is to find a hard surface.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a hard surface for them to attach to, and once they do, they start splitting, the polyps start splitting, and that's what starts the coral growing. But it's got to have the hard surface to attach to. And, of course, what if you got in the ocean and seafloor? You've got sand and water. So that's very, very few of the trillions of coral larvae that are released into the water actually end up finding a home, a hard surface to attach to where they can grow. Most of them die within days, if not weeks.
So your patent, your formula, your compound becomes the hard surface that the larvae can attach to.
Yes. As the base, just as if it was rock or actual coral reef, which is the coral skeletons. That's what a reef is made up of. The base is the actual coral skeleton that's been left there. They just keep growing on top.
And the calcium carbonate inside of your patent, your compound, acts as something that the larvae would accept and not reject, because that's the other factor in the coral reef is the calcium carbonate. Is that right?
Well, no, that makes it environmentally safe.
Okay.
Is what it does.
Okay.
It's using the calcium carbonate. It's better than using concrete.
Right.
Or other surfaces.
So it's just environmentally safe. I was just thinking that maybe because it's a shared element that it would bond with it more easily because of the calcium. It would be recognizable to the larvae on some level.
I wish, but the other materials in this, it's not that the calcium carbonate is on the surface of the formula. No, it's a part of the formula, but it's not part of the surface. But I think that's what it came about, was making me think that I could replicate corals to do this. And the whole part is that we actually, if we expand the actual sizes of a reef and be able to plug in live corals that are being grown right now that are more accepting of the current environmental conditions that they have to live under, which is what they would, being grown, they're more able to monitor and actually help the coral's health condition.
So
I'm trying to increase the actual size of reefs in the oceans all over the world. I want this all over the world. There's such a tiny, there's literally a tiny amount of the ocean, but they are so vital to the environment of humanity, to the environment of our world. And they're just a tiny little amount. Right. And we need more reefs. We literally need to build more reefs. And that's what I can do.
Well, we're seeing this across the board. We're getting these warning signs, like the colony collapse of bees, which is very serious, development, terrestrially. And then we're getting the relationship with the coral reefs, which is, from what I understand, about 25% of the ocean's fish life is dependent upon coral reefs. That's a huge number.
Yes.
So let me ask you just a quick question. Again, I want to go back and kind of, sort of cover something that you may have left out, and that's the patent process from start to finish. How long did that take you?
Well, I went under application in 2002, and it was in 2011, August of 2011, that I finally was given my patent. In the interim, though, I was introduced to the U.S. government, and which was very interested because I actually have another application that I developed for this, which I think is very important, is for a coating to put on all of the items that are being put into the ocean right now to make as artificial reef, like ships, subway cars, refrigerators, washing machines. You won't believe the stuff that people are dumping, even our governments, into the oceans. But they're putting these things down like ships that are being sunk for artificial reefs, whereas the lead paint has been sandblasted off the ship's structure. But they're dumping these things down, which is rust, which is further pollution in the waters.
Right, you're getting iron oxide off that rust.
It's awful. It's literally awful. But I came up with using this. My product can also be put on the surfaces, on all the surfaces of these items that are being put in the ocean, and from the studies that I've had done on the products was that it could last anywhere from 100 to 200 years before it breaks down to rusting, to where the ocean waters would reach the metal and start rusting.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've got several applications for this formula, but to me, the most important one was the reefs. And, of course, the aquaculture facilities to farm, and we don't need just 50,000 or 100,000 or a million. We need 50 million corals being grown. We need. Anyways, okay, I'm sorry. I got off topic there, but back to the process. Yes, it was very difficult. I've had, as you know, with patents, it can just change the least, chemical or process in the whole process, and you've got a different patent. Someone can just change the least little element of it, and and they can take it. So
right. So it's a very precarious process.
yes, it is.
Very
yes,
precarious
it is.
process. And some of your interactions with the government weren't all that positive, were they?
No, they were not. No. I don't know how much I should speak about that. It's
Well, you don't have to speak to anything about it. You could,
okay.
you could just, allude to the fact. And I think people have a vivid enough imagination and enough kind of background on the nature of how the government, is working at our current state of governance. This hello BLM, FDA,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
these agencies that have been turned. They used to represent sort of the ability to stave off sort of the corporate push. It was the hedge and the wedge against corporate greed and shortcuts and all that stuff. But now they've been, again, I'm going to use this term, weaponized, and they've been weaponized, and they've become these arms of the federal government that are interfering in people's lives, their livelihoods, their land, their relationship to water, because the whole idea now is for there to be more centralized control, across all areas of governance. And,
yes.
and in many ways, shapes and forms, favoring the corporate model. The two are working hand in glove now. So, we don't need to go into the details about what it is. I think based on the fact that we have an understanding about how government works these days, people have vivid enough imaginations, and they can fill in the blanks for themselves.
Yes.
So what I want to do now is I want to talk about the what next for you. The what next for you. And the what next is, where do we go from here? How do we take an idea that is so deeply inspired that it came to you in a vision, and it came to the right person working in the right field and the right background with the right relationship to the history of coral? I mean, all of this is divinely timed and aligned. So how do we support this vision and move it forward? That is, I think, the next level of conversation. And I've been giving some thought about this. Now, there can be the humanitarian need to preserve the oceans. And so you get into, NGOs, or you get into foundations, or you get into people that have extreme amounts of money who are having kind of an Aquarian experience and want to devote some of that money to your cause. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is to have people that are invested in a profit motive. Now, you could ask yourself, well, how is there a profit motive in saving the oceans? Shouldn't that just be enough? Shouldn't we just care enough? Well, on a philosophical level, unequivocally, the answer is yes.
Yes.
But perhaps there are people in the fishing industry that really depend on that 25% of the fish that they can farm, that they can fish, and they don't want that to go away. Because if that goes away, their business goes away. So perhaps there's a profit motive that you could find a partner in, one of the major fishing companies. Maybe it's, the tuna people. Maybe it's, one of these canned good tuna, salmon, whoever they are, manufacturing, and say, hey, I want to throw down because if this goes away, my business goes away. So there are two ways in which we can promote this. For you, it's either going to be foundational and benefactorial, or it's going to be profit motive driven by protecting the reefs. They're protecting their investment in a long-term relationship with farming the oceans. Then there's the third, and I think this is something that maybe you might be able to think about, and that is to be self-funded. And there is an explosion happening right now with Indiegogo, GoFundMe. Don't know if you've gone down this path, but there are people that are getting funded upwards of $1 million for their projects.
Oh, yes.
So you have a compelling story. You have an incredibly compelling story. You know, you could make, maybe there's somebody out there that's listening to this broadcast right now or in the podcast phase. And if you're willing to throw in with Madelaine, maybe you want to do an interview with her and get her story and put it to use as part of an Indiegogo package. Let me ask you a question, Madelaine. If somebody, if people said, we love this idea, and in the course of the next 3 months, you'd be able to generate $1 million and being able to fund your idea, what would you do with that $1 million?
What would I do with it? Well, I actually have the access to a manufacturing facility. I would try and make contact. There are so many organizations out in the world right now that are working towards ocean conservancy, trying to deal with the coral reefs, the environment and such. I would hope to be able to start manufacturing corals myself, introduce myself to some of these organizations when there's several. One in the Caribbean right now is called the Caribbean Initiative, and there's other organizations like the Ocean Elders, which were started, which are their leaders, world leaders that have come together trying to deal or help with ocean conservancy issues. And they're gearing themselves up for dealing with trying to help the coral reefs also. I want to make myself known to these organizations that I have these ideas. I have an environmentally sound and safe product that can be used. Actually, the scientists, I've had people, though, well, I won't go that route now. I'm being very positive. Just because I'm someone that doesn't have the degrees in the marine sciences and such does not mean that I do not have the passion that is necessary to see that our coral reefs are saved. This is not just, for tourism industry. These are, I think I told you, like with small island nations, all through the Caribbean, all around the world, there are islands that literally their inhabitants depend on the coral reefs for their very sustenance. And I want to introduce this product to get it out where I can have countries be willing to take on these projects, put up coral farming facilities and research facilities, put reefs off of their coastline. And I think, considering what they mean for the tourism industry alone, is in the billions of dollars a year, tens of billions of dollars a year, all over the world. I want to make up. I want to make this product. I want to build reefs around the world, and we can do this. I can do this.
I really want to focus on the Indiegogo and GoFundMe, because I really think that your idea is prime to be independently funded and get you a launching pad, so that you could technically find a coral reef somewhere in the world that you would have a relationship with, that you would have, an agreement to implement your idea in a specific reef. And then once you get your funding, through the Indiegogo sector, that this coral reef, this area becomes your R&D, and you can show the rest of the world. And once you're able to plant your idea in physical reality in this one space, and I think $1 million gets you up and running. Let's just get it out there. Let's put it out there. You want $1 million so that you can begin the manufacturing of this, and that you can implement this so that you can show the world how this will change the planet. And I think this is where your idea can really take roots. So I'm throwing that out there to you. I'm throwing that out there to the people that are listening. Again, we talk about what can we do, what can we do, what can we do. Here's something we can do. We can support an idea like this. Now, I'm going to go one step further, because not only would this empower your vision, not only would it conceptually help us save our oceans, but from an empowerment perspective, we cannot underestimate the potential for something like this to change our world, to bring the power structures back into alignment with who we are as servants and channels of God, prime creator. This is what we're capable of. This is what we were put on this planet for. So I'm here to support your idea right here and now, and I'm putting it out there to anybody else that's listening to support your idea as well. If people want to get in touch with you, and I know you're very private about this, but this is a public forum, you decided to come forward, let's take it one step further. If people want to reach out to you and support you, how can they do that?
I have a email address. It's Nemos Reef 9. That's NEMOS Reef REEF 9 at gmail.com. You know, Robert, I'm hoping that I want to have the means. I had told you that I was hoping to go the route of Indiegogo, and I'm actually working on that. There's several research articles. They've been published, but I'm seeking permission by the authors to include them on my Indiegogo page. It's really very, I think it's very important that people, when they do check out, or hopefully would come and endorse this endeavor, that I want them to understand themselves from the experts. Because I'm not an expert in this. I have no degree or anything in the marine sciences. But I want them to understand the critical nature that the coral reefs are in. And when the coral reefs are gone, this world's going to be in serious, serious trouble.
Yep.
But
and like I said, we've got a number of early warning signs, from colony collapse to the coral reefs to the deforestation of the rainforest. The lungs of the planet, the lungs of the ocean, the messengers of life and light in the form of the bees. They're all taking major hits.
Oh, yes.
So we've got to, again, we have to take accountability for our lives and our environment. The free lunch is over. The free ride is over. It just is.
Oh, it is. There's no doubt about it, and we're almost reached the critical stage. Let me tell you, the El Nino that is just passing over our planet at this time right now has caused such devastation to the Great Barrier Reef off of Australia.
Right.
They're already estimating that upwards of 80% of the Great Barrier Reef is now bleached out and possibly dead.
Yeah, it's a travesty.
And that is working itself into the Atlantic now. It's already affecting the Atlantic Caribbean corals and such. The Fukushima disaster, my God, what that's done to the Pacific. And when people realize that's gone. I mean, the devastation that's going to be realized from that alone is, my God.
Well, we're also really being subjected to the weather wars. And
Lord.
La Nina, El Nino, these are all artificially created environmental disasters because of what's happening with our skies and geoengineering. I could go on and on and on. I could talk about what's happening in Texas, where we're inundated with water now every single year. 2 years ago, it was the storm of the century. We didn't have, a season like that for 100 years. Happens every 100 years. Well, guess what? The next year was the same thing. So we had 200-year storms back to back, and we're lining up again for a third year of 100-year storms. Now, you can't tell me that this isn't due in part to the manipulation of our weather, which changes everything. It changes so much. It changes tidal patterns. It changes weather fronts. Now, Austin, which used to have a dry climate, is becoming humid, like Central America or the Gulf Coast or Houston. You used to be able to get away from the dense humidity from the Houston area and come north into this kind of southwestern, more arid climate. That's all changed, and it's impacting everything, including the ocean. So this is our time. We got to get into this. We got to figure this out because and the MFers that are running the show don't give a shit. And in fact, to be quite honest, their stated plan and goal is to reduce population numbers. That's it. Reduce population numbers. Overpopulation, by the way, is a myth. There is plenty of space on this planet, and I'll give you a stat that shows you how much space there is on this planet. All right, if you could put everybody on the entire planet shoulder to shoulder, and they'd be able to fill up the state of Texas. That's how much space there is.
Yes.
Just think about that. So let's take our power back here. We're in a big retrograde cycle, astrologically, bringing things back home. Pluto retrograde, Jupiter's gone direct, Mercury's retrograde, Mars is retrograde, and this is the campaign that I'm on, and this is the campaign that we need to be on. So in order to do that, we got to cut off some of the distractions. We got to stop following the false idols. We can stay in tune with what they're doing to us, theoretically with manipulation. That's fine. That's well and good. But our attention needs to be in a new place, a new signal, which is taking our power back and finding ways to support people like you. So to that end, I want to really thank you for being on the show and sharing your story with us.
Robert, I'm so very grateful. I'm really honored that you asked me on, and I certainly hope that the folks, the listeners, will take the time, do a little research themselves, and see what's happening in our world right now. It's going to be up to us. It really is. We've got to get out there and help as much as we possibly can. Otherwise, there's not going to be an Earth. There won't be a future for the generations that are still to come.
That's
I don't
right.
have children, but I have many nephews, nieces, great-nephews and nieces, and I'm sure plenty more to come. And I don't want this world, what's happening right now, there won't be a world for them. There won't be the beautiful, the majestic coral reefs. I mean, not just the beauty alone, transforms people. It'll transform your whole state of being to see a beautiful coral reef. and the fish that are in them that make them their home.
You know what I would
want
love?
that.
You know what I would love? What I would love is I'm gonna try to get you in touch with some friends of mine who live in New York, and they're on the cutting edge of virtual reality. I would love for them to create, or somebody to create, a virtual reality experience so people could go in and experience kind of the death of the coral reefs and then also experience the vibrancy of the life. It'd be great if they could go out and go into the reefs themselves. Not everybody can do that, but here's one of the things where virtual reality could be a great tool, a great,
God.
to really open up people's ideas. And you could even do like a training video in virtual reality and have you, watch the life cycle of your coral inserted into the reef and have the larvae attached, and people could watch the whole thing. I mean, I think that could be
my God. that would be incredible.
Yeah, now we're getting into exciting territory, because now we're getting the technology to work for us, right? Instead of us being the slaves of the technology, and the technology and sort of the matrix mindset driving the relationship. It has a very different focal point. Well, let's give out your email address one more time, Madelaine, just in case people are inspired and want to jump on board.
It's NEMOSREEF9 at Gmail. That's NemosReef9 at Gmail.
So I just wanted to give you one little factoid before we sign off today. I was looking at January 9th. And we know if there is a day in history, because that's your birthday, correct?
Yes.
So I was looking at, is there a day in history that relates to your birthday that is worth talking about and bringing into this discussion? And there is a day. There is a day that is definitely worth talking about and bringing into this discussion. And do you know what that day is?
No.
That day is January 9th, 2007. You know what happened on January 9th, 2007?
No.
Steve Jobs unveiled the first iPhone.
Wow.
So here we have, on your birthday, a product that was introduced that has changed our lives and changed the world. We had smartphones with nothing like the iPhone. And on January 9, 2007, Steve Jobs brought that into our consciousness, and it changed the world. So hoping that that's a good sign for you and your idea, your vision, and your patents. Just wanted to give you a little bit of synchronistic trivia there.
Thank you.
No, you're welcome.
Robert, there is such abundance in this world, in this universe, but in our world, there should be no person go hungry. No person should be without shelter and the means to live a life, that's not abundant.
Yeah, I agree. And let's just project this out into the future. Let's say you do an Indiegogo, you get your $1 million, you start your lab, you start your creation, you can employ people. How about that?
Oh, listen, one thing I do want to say, I have said my prayers for a long time that I had hoped that people that believed would hear about this and believed in it as I do, that everyone necessary to make this project go forward would show up. And obviously, my first contact with you has started it all off now. I knew that it was going to happen someday. and it finally has. But I believe that everyone, all the people it's going to take to get this project on its feet and bring it to fruition will make contact with this, and then we're going to be off.
Well,
we'll be off and running.
All it takes is one key person, and I'm not saying I'm that key person. All it takes is one key person to believe in your vision and to get excited and say, I'm in, and and then there's another person, and they help you build the Indiegogo thing or whatever it is. Next thing you know, you're off and running, and at your prime stage and age in your life, and you're a Capricorn, and you're not even close to being done, then you've got the runway for the next 15 years of your life, and to make your contribution to this planet, and to be able to fulfill the vision that I think was divinely guided to you, and to carry that out. And there should be steps along the way where you're going to be helped, and let's hope that this is the first step towards that, okay?
I thank you so much, Robert. I really do.
Well, you're welcome.
I'm very grateful. You are in my prayers, my blessings.
Well, you and I will talk offline, and
okay.
We'll talk again soon, okay?
Okay, will do. Thank you again, and to everyone out there, y'all have a blessed day.
Thanks, Madelaine. You too. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.
Madelaine Fernandez. What a story, huh? What a story. Everything from the vision to the comprehensive idea and care for the planet's underwater lungs with the coral reefs. And just listen to the purity of that woman's voice. There's no agenda there. There's no grandstanding. There's no standing on top of a mountain and saying, look what I had, look what came to me, aren't I special? This isn't about extraterrestrials coming down and saving us. This is us saving ourselves. We're in a time now where this is what it's about, people. If you're looking for something to do, get on board. Email this woman. How can I help? What can I do? These are the types of initiatives that we need to get behind. Because if we don't get behind them, we're going to be left behind. And our future will be determined for us by people and entities and by a growing sense of automated consciousness that will literally drill us out of existence. So this is a stand for humanity. This is a stand for organic nature. This is a stand for being able to stay in touch with our analog world. I am not opposed to digital culture. It's serving a purpose, and it's supposed to serve a purpose. We are not supposed to serve it. So if you're sitting around saying, what can I do, what can I do, what can I do, get in touch with somebody like Madelaine. And then say, what can I do? I can't do everything. I'm trying to build a business. I'm trying to bring my videos out into the world. I've got my own piece, this little small slice of what I'm doing in my life to be able to generate ideas, to be a greenhouse in my own way. But I could only do so much. If I had more resources, I could do more. But I'm not alone. There's a whole vast audience out there that listens to me. And hopefully one or two of you will find Madelaine's story compelling enough to say, I want to get on board. I think she needs an Indiegogo site. That's what I think she needs. I also think she'll need a video. She'll need all those pieces to be able to tell her story. So her goal is to raise, at the very least, $1 million. Do I think that that's non-doable? No, I think it's totally doable. So she can manufacture and implement her idea, build her laboratory, train her people, put people to work, and to have one test zone, one coral reef somewhere in the world where it all happens. So it can be a living testament to her work and where we can take this thing. And just think about the potentiality. If she can get somebody like StarKist involved, they see this. They're saying, you know what? We got to protect the fish. We need to protect the coral reefs. Let's get behind her. This is where somebody like Costco, hello, Costco, what are they doing? They're investing in organic farms because they want to be able to be in control of a need that people are responding to. Is the coral reef not that far apart from an organic farm? It anchors 25% of the ocean's marine life. And that's just a direct 25%. If you scale that out, I bet you it's closer to 40%, which is almost half of the ocean's marine life dependent upon the coral reefs. So there's got to be a commercial partner out there, but she can't find the commercial partner, I think, unless she has the working model. That's my sense. So if you're asking yourself, what can I do? Get their email address. nemosreef9@gmail.com. All right, let's play a little bit of music, and I'll wind down today's show. But we haven't had a kind of a little musical interlude for today. How about a little nice ambient music? A little nice ambient music from our friend, Richard Mystical Sun. This is Biosphere Pulse, fitting for today's show. You're listening to the Friday FARcast. I'm Robert Phoenix. We'll be back in 5 minutes and 18 seconds. That was Biosphere Pulse. Biosphere Pulse. That, by the way, my mistake, not Richard Mystical Sun, but another friend of the show, Kenji Williams. That's Kenji Williams' Biosphere Pulse. Just thought it was appropriate for our show with Madelaine and the coral reefs. It is 1:37 here in Austin, Texas, where we are subject to the ongoing, how do I say this, onslaught of the weather wars. I mean, we are having weather that is off the charts and has been off the charts now for the last 3 years. And I've talked about this consistently on the show, mentioned a little bit in the blog, but we are dealing with crisis levels of too much water. Again, the ground is saturated, there's flooding. When we have these huge storms like we did yesterday, there is insane damage to the infrastructure, and it's this ongoing experience, which again, we're at this phase where it's the 100-year cycle, the 100-year storm of the century. Well, we're going to have 3 years of that in a row. That's where it's headed. And that's how you change, by the way, the topography and the landscape and the terraforming of a planet and of a community. I don't want to get into too much of the cynical stuff because we've got such an upbeat show, but there is literally a ripple effect from this that touches everything from businesses, manufacturing, growth, and even the ability to deal with some of the drastic damages that can take place in rural counties. And eventually what's going to happen is services to rural counties, boys and girls, are going to be cut off. They're going to be cut off. That if you're living in a place that is not, mandated to be taken care of by the government and money that can be put into play in a state of emergency, you're going to be screwed. So more and more public services, less and less public money to go into rural areas to take care of the rural areas is going to be available. And what's going to happen is it's going to force people off those rural areas. Those rural areas it's kind of like what happened to the Native Americans. Isn't it interesting, the cyclical nature of the spiritual karma of a place? And the treatment of the Native Americans is one of the really sad and tragic tales of our time. It's one of those things where, and look, the pragmatist in me says this is what happens. Lands are taken, people are conquered. And it's happened in Europe, and it's happened in Africa, and it's happened in China. It's happened in South America. It happens. When the Spanish conquistadors came into Central America and Mexico, guess what they did? They slaughtered them. And then they instituted the mission system, which basically indoctrinated the remaining Native American population, the most innocent and disease-free of all the Native American populations in the California coast, became infected by Catholicism. So it's not just, quote unquote, the expansion of Western civilization, manifest destiny, Andrew Jackson and the Trail of Tears. There is a much bigger story here. It is part of life on Earth. People are conquered. Lands are taken. Populations are assimilated. It's happening right now before your very eyes. I'll devote a whole other show to it. That doesn't give us a pass on what happened with the Native Americans. But what's going to happen with what happened with the Native Americans, moved off their land and into reservations. The new reservations are the megalopolises and the emerald cities that they're going to want to move and migrate people into. Those are the new reservations, boys and girls. And that's what's happening. Interesting, isn't it? Now, do we want to live that way? Is that the way that we're going to determine, our existence? Well, if we allow people, the architects of the Brave New World, the anti-Aquarian age, let's just call it the anti-Aquarian age, then we'll let them. And it'll happen. It'll happen. But we have a vote, theoretically. Our vote is not a vote at the polls. Our vote is in our own incarnation and the affirmation of our consciousness. You've got to vote. You've got to say. We've been so disempowered, so brainwashed, so spellbound by the power of the wizard that many of us just don't believe that we can make a difference anymore. Look, I grew up in an era where I was proud to be an American. I've talked about this before. When the Olympics were on, especially in 1972, the fucking 1972 Olympics was I got to do a show just on the 1972 Olympics. What a freaking psyop that was. Holy Moses. Everything from the Russians getting 3 chances and a ref-assisted win at beating the Americans in basketball had never happened before, to the Americans' great sprinters at that time being given the wrong times to qualify for a meet, to qualify for the finals of the 100-meter dash, which was won by a Russian, Valery Bortsov, the fastest man in the world. So the Russians have the fastest man in the world. They have Vasily Alexiev, the strongest man in the world. They have the Russian basketball team who beats the American basketball team. It was a degradation of American dominance in the world, and it was rigged. The game was rigged. That's not to mention what happened in Munich with the Israeli Olympic team. We could do a whole show in the 1972 Olympics. So we have that. That's going on. On the political side, what's happening to Nixon? In 1973, Nixon gets into trouble. 1974, impeachment begins. What happens to a whole generation of young Americans? They become disaffected. They become cynical. This is what happened to me. I wanted no part of the process. No part. So what happens is that we, and our consciousness and our minds, are jerry-rigged through control matrix reality. And it's happening right now. It is happening right now, and it's happening with gender confusion, the whole gender bathroom, frontline assault on identity, and it's creating this sort of, this psychic dysfunction. And I'll get into it in another show. We got to take the power back. I mean, I'm gonna be radical right now. I'm gonna say fuck these people, okay? Fuck them. Fuck them and their control mechanisms. Fuck them and their agendas. Here's the radical reciprocation. Now, I'm not saying I'm not going to be out there. I'm not going to be spitting in the face of a CEO. No, that's not what we do. That is not productive. Leave that up to the social justice warriors and their prolonged sense of angry adolescence. No, let's take this to a mature level. Let's build things. Let's take back the power. Let's take back our will on a personal level. Let's take back our will on a collective level. And let us actively be involved in the reorganization of how all this plays out. Because we have a say. And don't for a minute think you don't. We're at a pivot point. Let's take the pivot and pivot with it. Okay, that just about wraps it up for today's Friday FARcast. I'll be back on Sunday nights. We'll get into 11th house and the astrology for the week ahead. Look, it's a full moon in Sagittarius. Get pumped up. Be expansive. Get into the expansive nature of your emotional experience. What's possible? What is possible? Revel in the realm of possibility. Look, put the end time stuff out of your head. Put the shoe dropping, the economy dropping out of your head for a while. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And look, there's a very strong chance it will. But let's get into a different scenario. Let's get into a creative, imaginative, proactive, solution-oriented scenario where we're creating a new world. And it's a new world based on our terms, balanced relationship with technology and biology, digital and analog. That is where it's at. All right. Thanks again. Always appreciate you listening, whether it's live or whether it's in the podcast. You know the drill. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stay open to what's possible. Here is Philip K. Dick. I'll see y'all on, drop some little text in there. See y'all on Sunday nights. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the Sagittarian full moon. I'm out.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point, a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this, an alternative world branched off.